This is a CBC podcast.
Tanse, Anine, Boujou, hello and welcome. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Dearchild. Today on a special Unreserved, 3 documentaries, 3 personal journeys, 3 stories of family, community, and the desire for healing. It's the time of year when thoughts of family are front of mind. For one woman from the West Coast, the desire to connect with her birth family weighed heavily on her for years. The search for her heritage would take Sally Hart from Vancouver to the Penalaquit Nation. The CBC's Jean Paetko brings us her story in the documentary Searching for Home.
Antha Sally Hart, Tanitsan Atl Penalaquit, Chach Melvin Baka. My name is Sally Hart. I was born August 17th, 1951, Taniatl, Saskatchewan.
Sally Hart lives on Vancouver Island in the small west coast city of Duncan. Her home is less than 18 minutes down the highway from the community of Chemainus, where the mystery of her birth and her identity began almost 70 years ago.
My mother wanted to do her last 2 years of high school in one, and the only way she was able to do this was to go to a Catholic school. So she lined up a summer job down at the cannery near Victoria, in Esquimalt, actually. And it was there that she met my father. He had worked in the cannery since he was a kid, and they met when I guess they were 16 and 17. They carried on a relationship over the few months, and when my mother returned home to Chemainus, it was revealed that she was going to have a baby. And so my father, who had been always quite enterprising, had quite a bit of money put aside from his work, and so they decided to elope. And so they set the date, and on the evening that they were to elope, my mother was caught coming down the stairwell with a suitcase. And that was the end of that story. It was revealed that she was pregnant, and that was not going to happen with my father being Native. And my mother's father said, there won't be any Indians in this family. So they were separated. My mother was basically confined and sent away to Vancouver to finish out her time, and I was born in Grace Hospital. In those days, you weren't allowed to see the child that you were giving up, and she convinced one of the nurses to wrap me up and smuggle me down to my mother's room. And she unwrapped me. She said she only had a minute, but she unwrapped me and said, I counted all your fingers, I counted all your toes, and this massive head of black, thick hair.
At 5 days old, Sally was adopted by a couple who couldn't have children, parents with a mixture of Irish, German, and English heritage. Growing up in Vancouver, the mystery of Sally's identity took root in her psyche when a mother and child visited her home.
I was 5 years old when my mother had a visitor, and the visitor had a child, a little baby boy. And in the conversations with this lady, my mother said, Sally's adopted. And the other woman's wording was, oh, my baby, in effect, is my own. And so after the lady left, I said, Mom, what does adopted mean? And she said, well, it means that you were chosen. I had to go to the hospital in order to get you. But that lady carried her baby in her own body. And I said, oh, And I guess it was just curiosity. But a short time later, I said to my mother, "So, Mom, if that lady carried that baby in her body, and I was picked up at the hospital, do I have another mother?" And my dear adoptive mom was not as strong in her own confidence, and I think I think it hurt her in some way, and she kind of turned on me, and I was just little, but she turned on me and she said, "Yes, but your mother died when you were born. Aren't I good enough for you?" And oh my goodness, that made quite an impact on me.
Unable to broach the subject again with her mother, a dentist gave Sally the first clue of her heritage.
When I was 7, I was taken to an orthodontist because my teeth were large and there wasn't very much room for them, so there's some issues coming up. And the orthodontist had me in the chair, and of course your mouth is full of instruments, you can't say a word. And he is saying things like, "Your last name's O'Reilly, eh? Well, that's an Irish name. I'm looking at the back of your teeth here, and the back of your teeth and the shape of those teeth tell me you're not Irish. You're either Indian or you're Mongolian. And so we're just going to get rid of the back of the teeth, the shelf on the back of your teeth." And he took his drill, and he drilled away the back of my front teeth. While I'm sitting there looking up in his eyes, and he is drilling away with his job, and I see all this reflected in his glasses, I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. Maybe I'm part Indian. In those days, that was the word. We used Indian because 1950-something. And so that was my first kind of indication of maybe who I might be as far as my heritage, and I was just delighted to know something about me.
With the first sense of her identity, Sally had to wait more than a decade for another breakthrough. It came during a medical exam to become a pilot.
The doctor is sort of pressing on the different bones in my body and said, "Oh, interesting. You have these bone formations inside your elbows and on your shoulders, inside your knees, and that would indicate to me that you are of First Nations ancestry. Is that true?" And I said, I think you're probably right, because I've had an orthodontist tell me this when I was very young. So thank you for confirming that." And he says, "So you don't know anything about your background?" And I said, "No." I said, "I tried to research my background, but in those days it was illegal for anybody to tell me anything. And I even went to the doctor that delivered me, and he wouldn't give me any information at all. So this is just more confirmation of a story that I only have bits and pieces of."
Despite compelling clues to her heritage, over the years, all doors slammed shut in the face of Sally's inquiries. And one evening, just after Christmas, sitting at home alone, feeling frustrated and hopeless, she reached a pivotal point in her search for identity.
I thought about loss and loss of children, because I didn't just lose my parents lost me as well. So I remember thinking, Mary, Mother of Jesus, Ait Meli, Ait the Noah Nitskaka. You, above all mothers, must know what it's like to lose a child. I'm ready to let go of this, but I'm hoping you can help me. Could you please do one thing, and that's touch my mother wherever she is, and let her know that if she ever had any regrets, that I'm loved and I'm well. And I hope she's well and that I love her too. And if you could just give me a sign, I would feel so much better about letting this go. Hajka. Thameli. Hajka. And I took a deep breath. And all of a sudden, it was as if this incredible golden shower of warmth came above my head and down over my head and shoulders and swirled around me and enwrapped me in this wonderful, warm shower of love. And I knew at that moment my prayer had been answered. And it's like my soul just took flight like a bird. The burden was gone, and I knew that somewhere, somehow, my mother was being touched and told that I love her and I'm well.
Making the heart-wrenching decision to give up her search for her birth parents, 3 days later, Sally's adoptive father asked her to come over. That night, he handed her a large manila envelope that changed her life forever.
And he said, I don't know how I got this, because we weren't allowed these kind of things back in those days. But he said, I'm giving it to you to do with what you will do with it, but you can't tell your mother I gave you this. Promise me you won't tell her where this came from. And I just looked at him, and he was very serious. And I said, okay, Dad, I promise. And I took the envelope, and I opened it up and slid out the papers. And they were my adoption papers with my birth name given to me by my birth mother, and the last name as well, and the final paper that said, and from now on, the child known as Velma Irene Lapp will now be known as Sally Teresa O'Reilly. And I'm just thinking, all of this was such a blessing. In total answer to my prayer, I gave up what was the most important thing in my life, and it was handed right back to me in that giving.
With a key piece of the jigsaw puzzle that was her identity, Sally carefully contemplated the next step in tracking down her birth mother, Ada Lapp. The first phone call, the first letter she sent, conveyed a yearning for discovery, but also a desire not to impose on the stranger who was her mother.
So when I found the number that was most likely a relative or a relation, I called the number, and this elderly lady's voice answered, and I said, oh, good afternoon, is this Mrs. Lapp? And she said, oh, yes, it is. And I said, I'm wondering if you might be the family that I'm looking for. I may have known your daughter in earlier years, but I'm not sure. Would you have had a daughter that had worked in the Chemainus Hospital? And she says, oh, yeah. She said, both of my daughters, two of my daughters worked there, and she gave me their names. I said, well, I won't trouble you now, but I said, would you be willing to give me your mailing address so I could send you a letter, and perhaps you might pass it on to your daughter for me? And she says, oh, absolutely. You know, she was so kind and so open, and I'm sure never dreaming who she was talking to. And over the next couple of weeks, I wrote that one letter, and I explained to her that I'd had a good life, but there were lots of questions about many things, health included, that I would love to hear about, only if she were willing to speak with me at some point. And I said, I know this must come as a shock, but if you think about this and decide that you don't want any part of this conversation and that your life has taken a direction and you don't want to look back, I'll understand. And if you could just please put this letter back in an envelope and send it back to me, I won't ever reach out again. And I received a phone call a couple of weeks later, and we met the following spring. And I went down to the ferry at Horseshoe Bay. And here walked this beautiful woman toward me, nearly 5'10". And I looked up at her as she embraced me, and I said, "Hello, Mother." I said, "What happened to me?" And she looked down at me and said, "Oh, I was just practicing with you." And we had a good laugh, and that was how we opened our conversation together.
Despite the fact that Sally's birth mother welcomed their reunion, she was reticent to share information about Sally's birth father. At first, she denied that Sally's father was Indigenous, but she ultimately offered the name George Barker.
I started to look up people with the last name. And I think it was about my third call, a lady answered the phone. And I said, "Would you be Mrs. Barker?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Mrs. Barker, I don't know if you might be someone who's related to the person I'm looking for," but I said, "The George Barker I'm looking for would have been in the Auxiliary Army when he was a young teenager, and he would have worked at the Esquimalt Cannery." And she said, she paused, and she said, "Oh my goodness, is this Ada's daughter?" Just like that. So I didn't know what to say. I was speechless. And then she got teary-eyed and she said, "Your father looked for you for so long." And I was just so grateful for that. Eventually, he called and we set up a meeting. And he walked into the little restaurant over on West Saanich Road where we met, and he took one look at me and my silvering hair, and I took one look at him and his bushy head full of silver hair, and he just said to me, "Oh my goodness, you are definitely my daughter." And the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, I wish I could have found you earlier, because we looked for you for a long time. It would have been good for you to meet my mother." And I said, "Who was she, Dad?" And he says, "Well, her name was Mary Ann Johnny. She was at the residential school on Cooper Island in those days, so it's now Penellicut Island." And I said, "Wow." And he says, "But she was actually born on Thetis Island on the Cut, because people used to move back and forth in those days."
The news that Sally's Indigenous grandmother was from the land that linked Thetis Island to Penellicut was both shocking and reassuring to Sally. Years before she had any information about her birth family, she had a compelling urge to take her car on a ferry trip to the West Coast Island.
And so I got out of the car and I walked up and down this piece of shoreline. And I said, "There's something about this place. I feel like I live here." I was so drawn to that place, I went back 2 more times and had the same feeling both times. So when I relate this story to my father, he just looked me square in the eye and he said, "Your grandmother was just welcoming you home."
With the discovery that her father was a member of the Penalicut Nation, Sally went on to embrace and explore her Indigenous culture and language. Today, Sally's home is the site of a language house for Hulkaminam. That's the language her grandmother was forbidden to speak at Kuper Island Residential School.
To have the full picture of my heritage and to know my relatives completes my heart's desire. I look back at the research I've done and the stories that have been told by my family to me, and the battle for our culture, our language, and in many cases our lives. And I have straddled two cultures in my life, and it's been useful to understand both of them, even though on my native side, not being raised in the culture means I'm never fully accepted and need to be just grateful for the sharing that does take place. And for the knowledge keepers that have endured for the sake of us all and for the sake of the future generations of Hulkaminam language and culture. And so I'm always in awe at how we think we are so polarized in certain ways to the various aspects of our life. But they are so interconnected. I could never express enough gratitude to my adoptive family for all they have gifted me.
After reconnecting with her birth parents, Sally Hart had close relationships with both of them until they passed away. The documentary, Searching for Home, was created by the CBC's Jean Paetko. The song, Light the Way, was written by Paul O'Brien and performed by Sally Hart. To see pictures from this story, you can visit cbc.ca/unreserved. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. Our next documentary captures a story that might be a first in Canada, a First Nation community where the chief is also the priest. This community is Kasheshawan, a Cree First Nation on Ontario's remote James Bay coast. The chief and reverend of Kasheshawan is a man named Leo Friday. He's been in politics for years, but was just recently ordained as a priest by the Anglican Church. And Friday is aware that he is now somewhat of a walking contradiction, the leader of his First Nation, but also the leader of a colonial institution that has brought a lot of pain to his people. But Friday says being both a political and spiritual leader isn't so new. He even calls it traditional. The CBC's Eric White brings us this documentary.
The faithful gathered in St. Matthew's Anglican Cathedral on a snowy night in Timmins have confused looks on their faces. They are standing, waiting to recite their part of a call and answer prayer, like when the priest says, "The Lord be with you," and the congregation answers, "and also with you." But the priest in this case is speaking in Cree, standing in the center aisle, his gray hair flaring out to the side like a 1970s pop star. And he actually isn't quite a priest just yet. At the end of this ceremony, he will be ordained as the new parish priest for Saskatchewan. Leo Friday is already the elected chief of the James Bay First Nation and doesn't know what he'll call himself, Reverend Chief, Chief Priest, but he says there is already a word in Cree for what he is.
Kaniganit. I guess a long time ago it's the same thing. It's just long ago our elders used to be leaders in their community, and they're usually spiritual leaders as well. So I think it's the same job. A little bit different nowadays, but I think it's still the same. The government came along and called us chiefs.
We acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the Treaty 9 territory of the Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, Mushkegowuk-Cree, and Algonquin people, and on the traditional lands.
Leo was born in Saskatchewan First Nation 61 years ago, decades after Christian missionaries first brought their religion to the Mushkegowuk people of the James Bay coast.
My parents grew up to be believers, and they taught me a lot. Not only my parents, but the other elders also talk to me and teach me the things that they understand and how they understand. And that's how I became what I am today. Yeah, it was packed all the time, in the mornings especially. But 3 o'clock it's not that much, but then 7 again it was packed then.
Young Leo even went to the Saskatchewan church in the evenings to listen to organ music. At 15, he was asked to start helping out the priest, and shortly after that, someone else in the First Nation asked him to consider politics.
I never thought of it in the beginning. I was asked to run all of a sudden, but I thought I wouldn't get in, so I just say okay.
Leo was elected to Saskatchewan's band council when he was 19, some say the youngest ever. At that time, many of the kids Leo grew up with were returning from residential school, mostly from the Anglican-run Horton Hall in Moose Factory. He never went to residential school. He doesn't know why, and never even thought to ask his parents about it.
I have no idea, but I think we spent a lot of time in the bushes. We usually go in September and come back in December before Christmas. And then we go out in March and then come back in June. Yeah, that's how it was for me when I was young. I think I was needed in the house. My father had a bad back, so I have to help out, I guess, and maybe that's why I didn't go.
Leo often thinks about how lucky he was to not go to residential school.
Yeah. A lot of times, yeah.
His older brother did go to Horton Hall and is still struggling with the abuse he suffered.
He came to open up recently and said it was really bad. Yeah, he's been going to counseling and all that every month. But he thinks it's helping him a little bit. But it's going to take a while before he's getting a full healing, I guess.
And despite what happened to him at the hands of Anglican priests, Leo's brother still goes to church. The legacy of residential school, which is deeply felt in Saskatchewan and all James Bay communities, made Leo think twice about becoming a priest.
Yeah, I do. It's really that's the thing that makes me think a lot before I answer yes to this.
Even before the sales came, the Columbus, we already had our self-government.
Paul Wesley is one of the hundreds of kids from Saskatchewan who went to the Horton Hall Residential School run by the Anglican Church. He says he forgot who his parents were over those 7 terrible years. Wesley now runs a cultural camp where Cree people, young and old, can reconnect with their traditions. It's in a place between the communities of Saskatchewan and Fort Albany that locals call halfway.
A long time ago, people used to live together at the old post. Before the missions came, people were all together. And when that time came for us to split, you know. The Anglicans came on this side, and the Roman Catholic stayed on the south side. And halfway, deciders came here.
What was once one community here on the Albany River was split in two by religion. Fort Albany became only for Catholics, and the Anglicans formed Saskatchewan on the other side of the river in 1957. The churches even changed the Cree dialect spoken by their faithful so that they couldn't even speak with each other. Given all this, you might think that Paul Wesley would be outraged that Saskatchewan's chief, the leader of his people, is also the leader of something that caused so much pain for everyone he knows.
God made us to not judge each other in our beliefs. If someone believes in that road, that's good. You know, the churches, there's nothing wrong with the churches. It's only the humans that made mistakes with the church. And it was wrong when the government said your ways were wrong, and I've been healing since 1980, finding and practicing what God gave me. And I became a kind person when I was an angry person coming out of the residential school. Our chief is going to be ordained, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. If I start judging him against what he's doing, then I'm not a good person.
Religion aside, the church is also seen by many Indigenous people as an institution of colonialism. Just listen to this hymn sung at the Saskatchewan church with Leo up at the pulpit. It's to the tune of God Save the Queen. These are all questions Leo wrestles with, but he thinks that Cree people can choose to use Christian teachings to understand their place in the world, not because it's imposed on them.
I think they are willing to take pieces of that and put it all together. I think it will work. It will work if we do believe in one God, and that's the same God that our elders believed in.
On this Sunday, there are only about a dozen people worshiping in Saskatchewan's brand new church. The one Leo went to as a child was condemned due to mold from the many floods that have plagued this community. For the last few years, the congregation met in an old construction trailer before this new church was built. Most of those sitting in the pews have gray hair and wrinkled faces.
I'm 70.
70.
I'm going to be 71 probably under 2 weeks, 3 weeks hopefully. Yeah.
Simeon Wynn says he's never heard of a chief who became a priest before, but doesn't find it strange.
He was a really good man from our community. That's what he needs most of, to be the minister and the cash.
For Leo, he doesn't see much of a difference between his two jobs. Whatever hat he's wearing, he sees himself as a helper.
Especially when they call for somebody, like they need comfort in their homes, and when they call me, then I just go right away. When they, when they walk to a brick wall, I guess that's when they call us to help them out.
Leo does wonder about the workload he is now taking on with this new weekend job, leading services, performing weddings, funerals, christenings, because his day job is pretty hectic. Any community of 2,300 people would keep a leader busy, but Saskatchewan has more challenges than most. Saskatchewan sits on a low spot along the Albany River and has suffered through several deadly floods in the past and is now evacuated every spring. Leo and his council are now making plans to move all of Saskatchewan to higher and drier ground 30 kilometers upriver, and that would include the newly built church. Leo is hoping as a priest and a chief that Saskatchewan will heal once it leaves the flooding behind and moves to this new promised land.
Because we have a lot of problems here in the community. It's all kinds of healing out there that missing right now. Like maybe if we see something different or beautiful, then I guess there's going to be a lot of hope and a lot of blessing, I guess, in the future. I'm proud being a chief, or I'm proud to be a priest. I just want to look myself down, humble. Sometimes I feel bad when I wear my headdress, thinking that I would somehow get something bad out of it, but I like what I am and what I want to show to my people, that to be humble, I think it's the right thing to do.
For CBC Radio, I'm Eric White in Saskatchewan.
Thanks to CBC Sudbury's Eric White for bringing us that story. If you want to see photos of Saskatchewan First Nation, head to our site, cbc.ca/unreserved. A modern musical that explores the legacy of residential schools has been making waves across the country. Children of God tells the fictitious story of one O.G. Cree family. It was created by Corey Payette, who is a playwright and musician from Northern Ontario. Corey spent 8 years writing the show. To be sure he was doing justice to the story, he spent hundreds of hours interviewing dozens of residential school survivors.
I felt an enormous sense of responsibility to honor these survivors who took the time to share their stories with me. I don't take that support that they've given me lightly. I see that as then I have the responsibility to make this show everything that it can be to honor what they've been through.
Children of God is Corey's attempt to understand this part of our Canadian history for himself personally and to share what he learned with audiences through music. The CBC's Jennifer Krumka got the full story from Corey on stage at the Sagebrush Theatre in Kamloops.
So what we're going to start with right now is just going to, whenever you have an offstage singing from the top of the show, going to your offstage singing positions. Sam, we'll go from the first one.
Let's go from top of show, please.
Chateau.
Ever seen it from the gate. I was never let past this spot. We're falling, but we will not touch the ground. Now there's a paved road that comes right past the front.
I believe that musicals work best when they're when a character can no longer speak, they sing. That's how I approach musical theater writing. And whatever that is, it's about situation. It's about that they, for whatever reason, cannot speak. And in the case of a residential school and people dealing with intergenerational trauma from residential schools, it is something that is a widely known thing, that silencing, that feeling that you can't connect or you can't put into words what that is, that music helps to access that place that is perhaps unspeakable for people. And so it felt very natural for it to use music as a way of expressing emotions that were beyond words.
We run away, we're running to... I'm right behind you, Tom.
When I started writing the show, I went to the library and I was trying to read about it, and I was trying to take out books and read newspaper articles and try to get all that information. And I was frustrated that the stories that I was hearing were so much about the facts and the figures, was so much about like X number of children were abused, X number of children died, and it just felt so impersonal to me. It was like, what are we, all just statistics? Like these are not just numbers on a sheet. And so I looked to the survivors to help me through that, to get to the personal. This one story of this O.G. Cree family that is a fictitious story. It's a story that I created. Tommy and Julia are creation. But it is inspired by all of the stories that we've heard, all of the survivors that I had a chance to meet with and talk to. And I went to Williams Lake and I was speaking to a survivor on the back of his pickup truck, and he talked to me about forgiveness. So up until this point, the show had been primarily my frustration. It was like I was frustrated, I was angry. And what he said to me was that, he said, if he had not forgiven and gone through a lifelong process of healing, that he would have died. And that the friends that he had from school who hadn't forgiven and hadn't gone through that healing process were no longer with us, because you can't survive it. And so he said to me that, I hope that you're not just going to make it about the traumas that happened, and also include what the big picture looked like and what it would take to heal from this. And so that changed the show. That changed it from that moment on, and it became about not just healing for a family, not just healing for this group of students who are trapped in this school, and then not just healing for the community and audience that we have who get to watch us, but that it's a healing for all of us. It's something that we all need to be a part of in order to move forward. And I also think that people just don't know of that strength. Regular people, they read it in the newspaper and they say, oh, that's so sad, or oh, that's horrible or devastating, or whatever their response is, but they don't recognize the strength of Indigenous people, of these survivors and their descendants, to overcome this history, of what it means and what it takes in your own spirit and self to pick up your language, to pick up your culture, and to be proud of that. Like, that is something that I think if more people knew, I think we would have a very different understanding of Indigenous people in this country.
Anin, my name is Dylan Megan Chiblo. I am from Gittiganzibi First Nation in Ontario, which is also known as Garden River First Nation. Oh, I had never thought that I would get to do a musical where I get to sing in Ojibwe. Never thought that would happen. Didn't think that would happen. No, I thought I would be like the token ethnic thing in like Oklahoma or something. But I mean, there's a lot of really good plays out there. But like a musical at this kind of scale, and Corey's took on such a big project, and the way he's weaving traditional music with contemporary music, I think works so well to help make this so relatable. For me, it was just like this was the dream role that I didn't know existed because nobody wrote it yet.
This is just before the backstage singing.
We're going to go back and do that again, everyone? Yeah, we're going back and doing that again. So if you go to your offstage singing positions, that would be great.
Stand by, please.
Sister still hasn't started her bed count. You think they'll fall for that pillow trick again?
I'll take my chances. I have to go home.
What about Tommy?
I'll come back for him.
When I started writing it, I would always tell the directors that I worked with or the actors that I worked with, I would tell them, like, this show is about changing the world. This story can change the world. If people knew this, if people understood this history and could understand it at a personal level, from a way in that is that you could start to see it through the eyes of this family, I felt like that could truly change the world. That's what I needed as a young person. I needed to know it through a personal story.
Oh my gosh! Well, both my grandmothers went to residential school in Ontario, and we did know that. The piece talks about this, that there are some kids that were hidden away from the police and the government and weren't taken to school. My grandma wasn't one of that, but growing up, she had a friend who would always come over for breakfast, and he would only speak Ojibwe to her, and she would only answer in English. But it was clear to me at that age, it might have been like 6 or 7, that she could speak Ojibwe if she wanted to, but she never did.
Gimme kwendena anine sinikazoyan.
When I grew up, I wasn't raised in my culture. I wasn't raised by a family that knew anything about their culture and language or background, really. My grandmother, to this day, is still ashamed of who she is and where she comes from. So for her whole life, like she was teased. She felt that she didn't get opportunities because of her indigeneity, and And part of what we're going through is unpacking that and trying to have an understanding of why that is and why it is that even Indigenous people feel that they cannot say that they are proud of their culture, they're proud of their language. This is something that's now becoming more common, but for a long time, a lot of people would hide that fact. And so, growing up, that wasn't something that we were told about. We knew that we were where we were from. We knew what nation we came from, but it really was my sister and I, in growing up, that we decided to change how we thought of ourselves and how we wanted to identify.
Do you hear them calling you?
This song is a song called Wonderland. It's a piece that I wrote in 10 minutes. And the song has not changed. In the years that I've been writing this show and editing and tweaking and all that, this song has stood all those drafts and I've never changed a word. Anyway.
We don't need any fathers. We don't need any mothers. Now that you've taught the savage, what will he do? Waits for your God to save her. The man we're ordered to pray to. She was a sister, a daughter, your ignorant child. This ain't no wonder, and I'm living, and I can't understand it all. If this is Wonderland I'm trapped in, then I hope I'll survive the fall.
That's sort of the first verse of it. It takes place after a great loss in the school. And it's the character coming to terms with the same questions that I have. That how could this thing that was put out there as a thing that was supposed to do good, like that was a promise of what was a good thing, and then went so bad, it's like horrifically bad, and that no one talked about it. Like no one cared enough to like speak up and to say that something needs to be done about this. I mean, from the not in the Indigenous community. I mean, from the rest of Canada. That is something that we will carry as a great shame because of this.
When I got sent the script, I did one pass of just all my scenes and was like, oh, all right, okay, and then got a glass of wine for the next time I decided to go over it, and then and that was emotional, and I was like, all right, I have a couple months to prepare, and so I better get myself ready to start telling the story, and realize that as much as I relate to it, that it's this character's story and not my own, to try to keep myself safe. And then when Corey sent me the music, and then I would read the scenes, play the song, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. The strings in Wonderland, we go from, Sister Bernadette singing her song "Their Spirits Are Broken" and explaining all this stuff that she's going through, and then for Tommy to appear in the field waiting for the train, expecting his mom to come, and then you just hear the strings come in on those multiple chords, and it's just like the riff and break inside Tommy saying, my mom's not coming, nobody's coming, and he's been waiting for years and years and years, and it's too late.
I lift my hands up to Corey Payette. Oh my goodness, the music in this is just amazing. Even after the first time I saw it stayed with me, I left the theater with those songs in my head, and I love it. I love it.
The process of writing this show, I have grown up with this show. I have seen an entire community of artists grow up with this show. We have artists who just graduated from university programs who are Indigenous, who this was their first professional show. And they've now been touring with us and doing workshops and productions for the past 3-4 years. So I've not only seen the work of how it's been realized for myself, but I've also had the privilege of getting to see a group of Indigenous artists shine in the pride of being their true selves, of being on a stage and saying we can tell this story as difficult as it is, and allow it to be something that we are constantly engaging with. That we're not allowing it to be something that, we know about, but that it's something that we're going to deal with later or something that we're going to find a different way to do it. We are all using our voices as artists to do the work of reconciliation in the communities that we visit.
I'm Laurie Marchand, the Executive Director at Western Canada Theatre here in Kamloops. I don't ever want to give away too much, but that ending is one of the most beautiful, powerful endings in any piece of theater anywhere in the world that I've ever experienced. So I don't think that it is an unfair comparison with works like Les Mis or Evita or any of those really astounding musical theater pieces that, to me, have that same impact, that same emotional impact. The fact that this reflects a true period in our history, I think, even pushes it beyond that.
I really do feel like it's a dream come true to do this, and I don't know if I'll ever do such a meaningful show. I had no idea that what I needed as an artist, what I needed to see in the world, was what so many other people needed to see as well, and that people were yearning for that they were looking for it. They wanted a story like this, and that has been it's been overwhelming to experience.
Corey Payette is the writer and director of the musical Children of God. That piece was produced by Jennifer Krumka. If you want to see photos from this show or hear it again, head to our site, cbc.ca/unreserved. A tour of Children of God is in the works for 2021. Check urbaninc.ca for details. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. We'll be back in this radio space next week for more community culture and conversation. This episode was produced by Stephanie Cram, Kyle Musica, Zoe Tennant, and Anna Lazowski. I'm your favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild, coming at you from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory. Thank you for listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. Agosay.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.